Welcome to Adeptus On-Air, the show where we examine how individuals and companies make decisions that drive their business and personal success. Each week, we connect with notable professionals who pull back the curtain on the industries that Adeptus has been on the cutting edge of for the last 30 years, including music, sports, and entertainment, as well as new emerging markets.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Adeptus On-Air. This is your host, Ashley Greene, and today we're talking to Will Bishop, who is a very celebrated musician who was classically trained and now has segued into playing the guitar, writing beautiful music, playing beautiful music, and it's indie pop. Is that correct?
That is quite right, yes.
Yeah, I've looked at some of the interviews and I see that it's been described in several different ways, your music and your music style. What would you like people to know about your music, or how would you describe it?
Firstly, let me say thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's really great to be here. I came from a classical background, so I was trained very formally in classical music. And when I started writing my own songs and started writing my own music, I wanted to play in as many different styles as I could, because growing up with classical music was great. It was a wonderful thing to learn and to be able to play in orchestras and things like that. It's a really fantastic way to learn music. But I wanted to branch out, and I really wanted to learn as many different styles as I could. But the one I settled on was indie pop.
So knowing so many different types of music, what is it about indie pop that really spoke to you? And how did you decide that that was going to be your trajectory?
That's a great question. When I started listening to other types of music than classical music, that's not to say I don't still listen to classical music. I still very much enjoy that sort of music. But when I started listening to other sorts of music, it was mainly through my parents and going through my parents' record collections and listening to a lot of what they had, and it sounded very different to me, to what I had been used to and to what I had been taught. And I was thinking, actually, this stuff is really good. I really like this stuff. How am I gonna start to play this? And they were into a lot of the greats, the great great singer-songwriters, people like Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Cat Stevens, a lot of the really great singer-songwriters from the 60s and 70s. And I started listening to a lot of that stuff. And then I went off and I found some people who would teach me that. But it was really through sort of listening to, going through my parents' record collection when I was still at school, and listening to what they were into.
That's interesting. So how has that shaped your relationship with your parents? You know, that you listened to music that was, very inspiring to them, and then now you're inspired by it, and, you've gone on your journey. How has that helped you guys connect?
It has and it hasn't, because they're my parents, so they're never going to see me as I'm always going to be one of their children. They're never going to see me as a sort of a great singer-songwriter. So in a sense, they do still look at what I'm doing, and they still do look at it with a slight sense of sort of reservation, because I'm trying to do something. I'm trying to emulate something that they were around for when it was happening.
Right.
So it's always going to seem a little odd to them, understandably, which is great. But at the same time, they they do appreciate, I think, that I can talk to them about music, and I can talk to people of their generation,
Right.
and I can relate to what, and they can suggest songs, and I can listen to those. And
Mm-hmm.
it is a good way to establish a slightly a different way of communicating
Yeah.
with people of that generation as well.
It's interesting that you say that because, they're communicating with, generations that are older than us and they've had different experiences. And especially when there's a parent-child relationship, that can be difficult. And it's really cool that you can use music to sort of span that gap, right? And have something to connect to. I'm interested to know how you feel like what you're doing differs and how it's speaking to, the current generation.
Um, the the current generation are the generation
You're listening.
um, who consume the most music,
Hmm.
and they listen to the most music, and they decide what's popular. It's based on what the sort of the younger generation, not even my generation, sort of Gen Z, that sort of generation. That is the generation really that defines the trends and defines what is popular.
Hmm.
And you have to some degree, in order to be at all relevant in any way to music, you have to sort of adapt to what they're listening to, and to what music they're listening to, and how they're listening to music. Otherwise, it would just otherwise, the stuff that I'm putting out there would have a very small sort of audience. So to
Hmm.
broaden that as much as possible, and to kind of try and stay as relevant as possible, um, yeah, I have had to adapt some of that, if you like, to a younger audience, which is fun, if anything else. I mean, it can be very, very fun to talk to people of a younger generation, and to listen to what they're listening to, and to see if
Hmm.
you can find anything in that which is um, which you might like to pick up on.
Hmm.
But really, it is a matter of adapting to those tastes, and to that way of listening to music, and that way of absorbing music.
Hmm. What's been your biggest lesson, or what is the thing that maybe surprised you or has been the most impactful in the way that you approach, attracting the younger generation? What about them and their interests and their, life experiences as young adults?
Without wishing to generalize, because
Hmm.
I wouldn't wish to generalize it. I think it's becoming increasingly important to treat people as individuals as
Hmm.
much as possible. So I don't want to sort of box anyone into to
Right.
any sort of to anything. But the certainly the just the amount of music which is now digital
Hmm.
is quite incredible, and the amount of information that people are absorbing so quickly is quite astounding. Because if you look at any of the kind of the big social media platforms, or the big sort of music streaming platforms,
Hmm.
it is very much um, sort of very short form content, and getting as much information across in as short a period of time as possible.
Hmm.
And for younger people to be absorbing so much information so quickly, I think is a great thing. I think it's actually a very, very positive thing, because they can pick up so much so quickly.
Hmm.
And it has been really a case of adapting what I'm used to making, which is kind of a longer piece of classical music,
Hmm.
involving sort of 10 or 12 different musicians in a with a conductor in a classical setting, and kind of condensing that down into a way which is going to which is going to grab the attention of a younger generation.
That's interesting. And I mean, obviously that method is working for you because you have a huge social media following.
Touch wood, yes. I'm very lucky to have. I'm very, very lucky to have so many people who are interested in what I'm doing. That's I'm very, very fortunate to have that, and that people keep showing an interest. And that's great because they can get something and hopefully take something away from that, and give me an audience to make music for.
So what do you hope that they take away from your music?
Oh, well, that's interesting. That is interesting because music is a form of entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
I think primarily music is a form of entertainment. It's something that people go to when they want to relax, when they want to take it easy, when they want to take a break from, what else is going on in their lives, and when they want to enjoy themselves, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I think one of the things that I always try to aim for, and I was always taught to aim.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught to aim for. I was taught to aim to always try and get the listener's attention
Mm-hmm.
and keep the listener's attention by giving them something they can enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
they can relate to, and they can use in a way as a space away from the stress of their everyday lives, or away from the stress of whatever's going on, and a sort of a space they can go to enjoy themselves. Really, I think that's primarily what I try and put across with the music.
Is there a time that you can remember when a fan of yours gave you, I don't know, something about your music that impacted them in their lives, and something that touched you and shaped you and really made you feel like this is what you should be doing?
All the time.
Yeah.
The music is a very, very personal thing, and for a lot of people, a very private thing. And everyone has a song which they associate with a time in their lives, or a
Mhm.
song which they associate with a particular event. Everyone has their favorite performance that they've been to. Everyone has something which connects them to music in their own lives, which is very, very personal to them. And it's a great thing if they come to me and say, "Oh, I really liked that song because of so and so," or because this was going on in my life, and I was listening to this song of yours, and it made me feel great, or it really helped with what was going on in my life. That's the kind of the best feedback that you can get, because it does mean that it's having a real effect on people's lives, and it's something that people will keep coming back to. But at the same time, the opposite can also be quite useful. If
Mhm.
someone comes up to you and says, "I really didn't like that,"
Mhm.
or if someone gives you negative feedback, that can be just as helpful, because it can show you and remind you, and it's good to be reminded sometimes, that
Mhm.
not everybody is going to like what you're doing.
Right.
And I think it's useful to be reminded sometimes that, what you're doing isn't going to be universally applicable to everyone, and not everybody's going to be, full of praise for you. Sometimes it's nice to get both sides of that, so you can, so you can do the things that you're doing well more, and you can do the things that you're not doing so well less. It gives you a good sort of a solid road to steer by, I think.
What so when you write, what's your biggest inspiration? Is it your personal life experiences? Is it literature? Is it poetry? What where do you draw inspiration the most?
Inspiration. Everyone is inspired by, I think, everything that goes on in your life can inspire you to anything that moves you in any way is inspiring. Anything, and I think that happens to everybody. It can be any sort of day-to-day, sort of very mundane thing. If you see something in a very sort of normal scene in a shopping mall or in a cafe or something, or say you see two people talking in a cafe, and they're very animated, and you see that and you think, actually, that's really interesting. I wonder what's going on there. That can be inspiring. Anything which grabs your attention and makes you think is inspirational. And that's everywhere, really. But personally, music, other people's music is very, very inspiring. And literature, of course, my academic background is in English literature, so I draw a lot of inspiration from sort of much older poets and writers.
You said something really interesting there. It's, that you can find inspiration in monotony, which I think is such a huge message for anybody, right? Because, we go about our daily lives and we're like, gosh, this is boring. I'm on a hamster wheel. So I think that's a very cool message, to find inspiration in monotony. It just, makes the world seem like a more magical place.
Yes. I mean, I think it is down to the individual, and we are all, in our day, going about our day-to-day lives, and something catches you, and something draws your attention away from what you're doing, and that's the kind of thing which is inspirational, and which you can sort of use as material for sort of creating something. Absolutely. And I think everyone gets inspired. I don't think there's by everything. So I don't think there's a particular sort of somewhere you have to go, or a particular place, or a particular writer, or a particular poem, or a particular piece of music that you have to go to find inspiration. And you don't have to think, right, there's this magical fountain of inspiration that people go to become inspired. Or I don't think there's, that is kind of a myth, because people just you can find that anywhere, just depending on you, and depending on how receptive and open you are to these people and their experiences.
Gosh, so one thing that I noticed, I was looking through some of your things. I'm really interested to know about your relationship with anime and how that's inspired you.
Oh, anime. Anime is anime is fantastic. Anime, I think, is a really, really great. I think it's one of my favorite. One of my favorite art forms, I guess. I think really it was the Studio Ghibli films that I watched. I watched a lot of them. I watched all of them sort of in a row, and sort of spent days and days watching these films. And I thought, this is a really, really brilliant way of telling a story. And this is a really, really brilliant way of drawing characters and um, and all of that side of kind of drawing you into a story and then really captivating your imagination in essentially what is a cartoon, but it is done so well that it feels like, it feels like a movie. And so I had seen some other artists that I was working with at the time, and they were using anime. There was and I think there still is a very big, what they call lo-fi anime. And it does actually tend to go back to students and to people, tends to go back to people who are studying and to students. And there is a kind of a whole genre now of music, which is sort of very lo-fi, very underproduced, very sort of simple music, which is meant for studying and which is meant for, which is basically meant to be a calming influence to sort of that kind of thing, which is meant to sort of reduce people's anxiety while they're studying. And there's that whole genre of music, which has come about because of that sort of need for students. And again, it's younger people who are at that point in their lives where there's a huge amount of anxiety around their future and what they're doing, and all that kind of thing. And that these huge genres come out of that of artists who are making sort of music which is meant to be relaxing. And that used to be what classical music was. That used to be how people used classical music. They used to, classical music used to be the music you put on when you wanted to concentrate, when you wanted to focus your mind on something. It was always classical music that you put on. And what's really interesting to me is how people are now using anime along with that sort of very underproduced kind of very sort of it's kind of like a very lo-fi sort of hip hop thing. It's kind of thing that Kanye West would do, but very underproduced. And if you listen to that and the way that's come about out of that student culture, I thought it would be great if I could do something similar. And I made the album. The album's called Americana, and it's available everywhere. So, it's not hard to find if you want to listen. And I made the album, and then I thought when I was doing the videos, I thought, right, I want to do these videos as anime videos because I wanted to kind of tap into that culture of sort of music which had that purpose to sort of reduce anxiety on one level, and at the same time it's very good music out of that, and you get some beautiful images and beautiful pictures. And I had the good fortune to work with some very good anime artists.
That's so. Question for you. So, okay, first of all, I'd like to know what you mean by underproduced. If you could explain, what that means.
Right. I'm not a record producer. Let me say that to the person that let me say that I'm not a professional, experienced record producer. I work with those people, but I am not one myself. So what I mean by underproduced is if you think of a track which is if you think of a song which is very kind of, which is a lot of sound going on, and it kind of feels like they're just throwing a lot of sound at you. I'm trying as an example would be something by someone like Meatloaf. Something like, you think of Bat Out of Hell, or you think of something like that, which is just a really big operatic kind of performance piece with kind of, kind of motorbikes on stage and fireworks going off and, full choirs in the background and 700 guitars and 14 drum kits and, and it's in an amphitheater somewhere in Greece or something. That sort of production is a very well produced, very operatic, cinematic piece of music. An underproduced piece of music is something which uses very minimal elements. So a very simple drum beat, which a very repetitive, very simple drum beat. And then very few instruments on top of that. So maybe just one guitar, maybe just one, and then little or no vocals. So it's using very few instruments. It's using very few production techniques. Nothing cinematic, nothing, nothing that's going to make you jump. That sort of thing is kind of what they're going for with a sort of a lo-fi sound.
Oh, that's yeah, I mean that makes sense. There's beauty in the simplicity and, absolutely calming, rather than having a lot of different things coming at you and being overly stimulated. So yeah, that's really neat. I also noticed too, and some of the things that I looked at on your social media and your music before, I saw that there was, influences from astrology. There were some sort of like esoteric things. Saw tarot cards. How has that influenced you?
Tarot musicians have always liked tarot cards for a very long time. There's always been musicians who've always liked their tarot cards. And that is a psychological thing, very much a psychological thing, because when I first was working with musicians, and I started working with musicians in the south of England, along the south coast, in places like Brighton and Southampton and Portsmouth. These are kind of seaside towns, very sort of coastal towns along the south coast of the UK. And a lot of the music scene there came out of 60s and 70s kind of hippie music, very, very sort of hippie, what my parents were into, but very, very hippie music. And there was a lot of that sort of hippie culture going on, which was kind of very big in the early 60s in the UK. It was that kind of, trying to recreate that in a way. That's kind of sit-ins and protests and, lots of that side of sort of really hippie culture and sort of, and there was always tarot around and tarot cards and people doing tarot reading. And there's still tarot readers on the beaches down there. You can still go and have a tarot reading. And what I was interested in is the psychological aspect of tarot, and because they've been around for a long time, tarot cards, a long, long time. And what I was interested in is what is it about these cards that is captivating people to the point where they're going to go to someone and say, can you tell my future? Or, I've got this problem. Can you help me with it? And they'll sit there with a pack of cards and then they'll look at the cards and then they'll say, oh yeah, you need to do this, 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 and this. And I thought what was interesting was the relationship between those images on those cards and what's going on in the human mind to a degree. And it is very, very interesting that these images and these cards, they do have a relationship to certain psychological processes, or they do correspond to certain psychological processes, which is very, very interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, I know that they say tarot is the fool's journey, which is sort of, what we're all on and, our path to self-discovery, as humans or as, spiritual beings having a human experience and, life and like you said, the different things that we go through. I did notice that you were particularly drawn to the Two of Swords. Is there a reason for that?
Oh, now that was when, gosh, Two of Swords. That was, I think, a picture that I used for a particular song,
Mm-hmm.
and I used for a particular. I used that on a particular song, which I think it was a more recent one that I released, but I used it on a particular song because the Two of Swords tends to mean positive change,
Mm-hmm.
and it tends to mean um, it tends to mean, as far as I can remember, it tends to mean positive change, and a deflection of negative influences in your life. So rather than a negative, so a change, but a change in a good way,
Right.
rather than a change in a negative way. So sort of, because change is generally considered negative. People don't, big changes tend to impact people badly in their
Mm-hmm.
lives, or can be difficult to deal with because it takes time, of course, these things.
Mm-hmm.
But the Two of Swords tends to represent a positive change. So a change which brings with it its own difficulties, but in a positive way, leading to a positive future. And that was what I think probably what drew me to the card.
Mm-hmm.
And um, and it's a really nice image as well. One of the
Mm-hmm.
great things about tarot is, and I think one of the reasons they turn up in so many places. I mean, you can buy one from Urban Outfitters. You can buy they turn up all over the place. Tarot cards.
Mm-hmm.
You can get them everywhere. They do turn up all over the place. And I think one of the reasons for that is they are such nice images. We don't have those cards anymore. We'd have a modern deck of cards. It's nowhere near as attractive as a pack of tarot cards. So I think for that reason, more than anything else, they're really nice things to look at for a start. And they're also that certain mean. They have a set meaning. They have a very specific meaning. These cards, which has been written down and passed down for centuries. But on that particular song, I think it was that because that tends to connotate change or positive movement into the future, which drew me to that one.
Hmm. That's cool. What was going on in your life at that point? Was there a lot of positive change going on, or have you experienced a lot of change in ways that you maybe didn't initially realize was going to be good, but then turned out to be great for your journey?
That's a great question. I think um, the when I write a piece of music, I don't necessarily think about what's going on in my life.
Hmm.
So I think now a lot of people I know do, and I know a lot of people when they are writing music are going through something really, really important in their lives. They're going through a big life event or a big life change, or they're working through something and they're finding a way to come to terms with that through music or through tarot cards or through whatever you choose, really, whatever works best for you. But I know a lot of people, especially musicians, will use that creative process, if you like, or they will sit down and write something with something that they have been through in mind. They will write about a certain event or a certain event in their lives, which they've found difficult or which has had a positive effect on their life. I don't always do that myself. So the way I write tends to be in a very specific way, and it tends to be about people and about people's relationships in a very general sense. But I very rarely draw on my own experience. Now, I'm sure that comes out whether I want it to or not, but I very rarely consciously sit down and say, something of this has happened, I've got to write about it. I very rarely do that. I'm sure in the back of my mind, while I'm writing, I'm thinking of something. I'm sure that those thoughts are happening somewhere in the back of my mind. But it's not something I consciously try to do.
So that's really interesting. So if you don't work through, I guess, some of the things that are going on in your life through music, what is your outlet, for processing, your life events, your emotions?
That's a great question. Oh, that's what I think. There are lots of ways to relax. If you want to relax, I think it's just about finding the one which works best for you. When I mean, there are lots of I mean, I like to read. I like to listen to music. I like to play chess. That's a way I find that a really great way to just relax and take my mind off what's going on. If I'm in a particularly stressful situation, I just take myself away from that and read a book, or go to watch a movie, or listen to a piece of music. That's how I deal with that sort of situation. So no, live music is a wonderful outlet for everything. I mean, if I'm on tour or if I'm performing or I've got a show coming up, and I can go up on stage and I can sing these songs and I can perform them in front of people. That's a really good, for me, that's a really good way of releasing some energy and of kind of, in a sort of a socially sanctioned space for that. It's a really nice way to go and do that. For me, that's a way I do kind of try to let off some steam. But no, I've never really used music or songwriting like that. And I know there are so many artists that do, and for them it's a really big struggle, and it's a really kind of, and they document the process.
Right.
And you can see they're happy to document this process. And you can see these people are really struggling and they are really going through something which is quite painful for them. And I think if they can take that event and then, and then use those experiences and those difficulties, and they can put them into something and then create something, I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think that is a brilliant way to deal with a negative experience, and that is a great thing. It's just not something that I do myself very often, because the way I write music and the way I write lyrics is to a very, not a formula. That would be too scientific. Not to a formula as such. There's no sort of magical secret chart which tells you how to write a song. But there's not that I've ever seen. But I write in a very structured and formal way. So um, I would never I wouldn't do that myself. I think even if I did, then I would edit it so much at the end that
Hmm.
I would want to go back to it and think, that needs editing now.
Right.
That's I would look at it and think that's that's a brilliant piece of self-expression, but it probably needs to be edited in order to make it into a decent song. So, to all those artists who do that, and to all those artists who are struggling with something and are using music as a way of working through it, yeah, I think that's a wonderful thing, and it's something that I wish I could do more myself. But um, I have other sort of outlets um, for those sorts of emotion.
Hmm. So there's one question I've always wanted to ask a musician is what is your relationship with silence?
Oh, silence is very important.
Hmm.
Oh, very, very important. Well, you could be philosophical about it,
Hmm.
and you could say something like there would be no music without silence. And you could be very philosophical, and you could go down that road of being very sort of analytical about the whole thing, saying that you need silence, especially in classical music. You need the what they call the rest between the notes in order to make the piece of music make sense. And that there's a very technical place for silence in music, and um, you can't really have one thing without the other. But silence, I think, is a very, very good thing. It's very, very good to be able to just sit with your own thoughts and not listen to anything else except what's going on in your own head. It's a very, very useful skill to have, just to be able to sit for 5 minutes and you know be able to be alone with yourself and your thoughts and not have any other interference. It's a very, very useful thing, silence.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I really appreciate silence and I get a lot of, comfort from silence, like you said, listening to your inner self and, coming into alignment and all of those things, which I think you can only do in silence. But, at the same time, music, I just think it's very interesting because they both can do something so similar, in the way that you process it and the way it helps you, I don't know, manage your life and those things. But yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that. I don't have a great point, except that, it's something that I think about.
It's No, it's absolutely right. I think that's quite right. I mean, I think if music, if you sit down and put on a piece of music, you relax and it takes your mind off things and you can concentrate and focus and think about other things for a while. It's a distraction in the best possible way, music, because it can take you away from um, whatever other noise is going along in your life, and whatever the background noise of other people and work or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's a distraction in the best possible way. And sitting in silence has just the same effect a lot of the time.
Right. Is there anything else that you would like the listeners to know about, your music or yourself personally, or what your goals or your mission is?
Um, with As far as my music is concerned,
Hmm.
well, the first thing is I would like people to listen firstly as much as they can, and to try and find something in there that um, and try and find something within that is useful to them in some way, that they will enjoy, or that they will make them think, or it will make them angry, or if they can be moved in some way, um, in whatever way it is, by that music, then then I think that would be that's what I aim for. But in terms of availability, it's all very easy to find. It's on all the major streaming platforms, whichever one you usually listen to, it will be on there. And I'm on I'm quite I frequent social media sort of more or less daily. So if you do want to, if you are interested at all in what I'm doing, then and you'd like to learn more, then it's then that information is all readily available through all the usual channels.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I really appreciated having you as a guest. I learned a lot. You gave me a lot to think about, truthfully. Um,
Well, no, thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. It has been great, actually. It's been great speaking with you.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On-Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.